Up. Hi, everybody. Just passing the time, sitting on the dock of the bay. And as Scott put it, we're setting our waiver claims while Rome burns. Let's go live. Thanks for showing up, everybody. What is the right answer in the Colts backfield? That and more this week on the couch. Scott Barrett. When we look back at the Colts backfield second half of the season, great schedule. Who, if any, will be great plays?
Oh my God, Sig.
Yeah.
Jonathan Taylor, I just thought was one of the all-time biggest locks as an NFL talent. The great Greg Cosell comped him to Ezekiel Elliott and was like, I don't know why he's not projected to get Ezekiel Elliott type draft capital. Freak athleticism by yards from scrimmage per game, ranks first all time among all Power 5 schools ever. And I wasn't that high on him for fantasy. I'm like, well, it's going to be a three-way RBBC to start. Marlon Mack's going to steal some early down work. Nyheim Hines is going to steal some passing down work. And then Marlon Mack gets hurt, and it's just, okay, I was wrong. Game over. Jonathan Taylor, league winner. Mm-hmm. You were right. Mea culpa. And what's gone wrong? I do not know. I wish I had something better for you. Maybe this ankle injury is like an ankle injury that's been bothering him for some time. Maybe it's just rookie growing pains. He's too in his own head. It's something along those lines. He's a home run hitter who's hit 0 home runs this year. Just I think one run over 17 yards and it was 21 yards. Maybe he is the type of guy you need to commit to, where it's like Derrick Henry, the more touches, the more destructive and powerful he is. But it's not good, and it doesn't look good. And this is also a pretty gross one-dimensional offense play calling wise. But yeah, it's Jordan Wilkins. Is Jordan Wilkins a thing?
Well, that's the thing, right? So to touch on the first thing you said, and welcome back to the couch. It's always good to have you, Scott.
Thank you.
Like you said, it's kind of mysterious. Is it this ankle, which may have been a lingering problem? Is it the speed of the game changing? He looks more tentative. He's just not making valid decisions. Like he doesn't look like he's in tune with the music and the beat around him. Certainly not in the way that Jordan Wilkins is. And Jordan Wilkins is good at football. #good at football. Just hasn't been able to stay healthy. So it's not surprising. And the interesting thing is for the ankle injury to come out, is this something to keep the rookie's confidence up to say like, hey, you're not really being benched. It's not really that we don't have confidence in you. Or is it an explanation that if the ankle gets a little bit better, although I'm not sure how much we can count on that. So I guess when we come to the rubber meets the road, Scott, do we go strong to the hole for Wilkins? Do we go strong to the hole for Wilkins if you have Taylor? Do we go strong to the hole for Wilkins to block the Taylor team? Is this one of those, if you've been saving up your bucks, go ahead and spend, because you got 2 matchups with Tennessee, 2 matchups with Houston, Green Bay, and Vegas. After this week against Baltimore, that's clear sailing for the running game.
Yeah, the thing about the ankle is that it's not in the eyeball. And like that really seems to be his biggest problem. It's just vision. Again, when I watched him on tape, I had so much fun, especially watching it in, like, you had to watch him in slow motion where like he goes into this massive pile and then he turns into 2D Mario and he just pops out the other end and like bursts for, a 50-yard gain. And if you watch it in slow motions, he's like doing like the Spider-Man, like the original Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire, where like the bully comes to hit him in slow motion and he just like subtly ducks underneath it, maneuvers around, and like that's who he was. And now it's just he runs flat into that pile and it's game over, and it's so disappointing. As for the backfield, I mean, none of these guys really give me a boner. It's just, Nyheim Hines is still going to have his role, and he's still not going to get. If you could promise me Nyheim Hines given an Austin Eckler 2019-esque role. Oh my! Like, and why wouldn't you do that?
I know.
Targeting the pass catchers, that would be so exciting, so sexy. But I don't see that happening. And Jordan Wilkins is just going to be, even if Jonathan Taylor's out for an extended period of time, just a glorified Marlon Mack. And who was Marlon Mack? He's a guy who scored 50% of his fantasy points in games where the team won by 10 or more points, which was just like 12% of his total games. So he's just totally game script dependent, needing positive blowouts. And so like none of these guys really moves the needle for me, but it's just disappointing for Jonathan Taylor, who looked like a true league winner week 2.
Yeah, week 2 was an incredible sell high moment. Like, reach out if you traded Jonathan Taylor in your redraft league in week 2, or even in your dynasty league, honestly. I mean, I'm not saying he's not going to eventually fulfill everything we hoped in dynasty, but I don't know what it's going to. He's going to have to become a 1,500-yard rusher to get what he was worth in speculative value at that moment. So he comes and goes. But if I'm hearing you right, Scott, it's just a general lack of enthusiasm, which I agree. And with Hines, if only he got the usage. Because last week you see what he can do. He could run a go route as a receiver. He could win in open field. Come on. This is why, by the way, Scott, this is why I'm terminally stuck with players that I like. Because this little glimpses happen. It's not me. It's not that I was wrong. Of course, that's what we have to make it all about because it's fantasy football. And we are on the couch. Oh, we need to hold some hands here, Scott. Maybe our own hands with George Kittle.
Kumbaya.
Yeah, we sing Kumbaya. It's a marathon through a minefield. And that's okay because it actually maps fantasy football to real football, to the teams that win the championships. They persevere. You lost George Kittle. Any names that pop into your head right away as trade targets, as waiver wire pickups, or just a plan if you lost George Kittle?
Yeah, it's just such an absolute mess at the tight end position this year, where it's sort of like, okay, you don't have Darren Waller, you don't have Travis Kelce, like
Mark Andrews every other week.
You're the same off as everyone else is, basically. I mean, Dallas Goedert's exciting to me. Is Gronk back? Gronk looks like he might be back.
Yeah.
He's averaging, 60 plus yards and then 1 touchdown in each of his last 3 games. It's a possibility, but not a guy I'm losing my mind over.
Yeah.
Jordan Reed, when he comes back, he was doing some things before his last injury. Ross Dwelly, we've seen him be productive for DFS when Kittle's out. Chris Herndon might get traded.
Yes.
So like
the true
Adam
test
Gase,
of the Gase effect.
Exactly. It's just, you're no longer coached by Adam Gase. You're going to score at least 15 fantasy points per game. But these are guys to look at. Tight end's just an absolute mess this year. So it is what it is.
Yeah, and it's not an accident, by the way, since you bring up Chris Herndon. It's not an accident that we are recording the show. We will be recording live up until about 4:15 Eastern as the trade deadline passes. And we did see Isaiah Ford become a Patriot. But we may get to react in real time to some deals, including Will Fuller, potentially. We're hearing about the dissension among the ranks in Green Bay. But going back to that tight end question, and look, this is why you like fantasy football, I hope, especially if you're in dynasty leagues where the trade deadline in the NFL should trigger in your mind, this is time to play GM in our heads, right? I mean, isn't this why we play fantasy football? We want to play GM in our heads. And no matter what, whether you have George Kittle or not, you have an opening here. Look at the George Kittle team's roster. If they don't have anything viable at backup, try to be the first one to get offers into them. Also, this is when you can play defense on the waiver wire. The Kittle team is one of the stronger teams. You pick up, even if it is Jordan Reed or Ross Dwelly or whoever, here's my 2 piece of advice. And for folks listening to the waiver wire, you already heard it. Check and see if Logan Thomas is out there. He's coming off of his bye. Coming in strong. Washington's schedule looks good. And then another player coming off of bye, Jordan Akins. Highly athletic. Deshaun Watson has made the tight end position viable for fantasy in Houston. So those are 2 freebies, I think, that you can look for on the waiver wire. As far as trades, maybe you try to catch Noah Fant or Evan Ingram if they have second halves that realize their value. There's small signs that it could be coming around. At least Evan Ingram caught that pass last night. Just for the record, by the way, pass interference on the 2-point conversion, Scott?
Oh, I don't know. I actually didn't watch that game live. I fell asleep at halftime.
We'll get
just
back
watched the highlights. Yeah.
Post something on Twitter whenever you get to see it. It was pass interference. Anyway, it was actually a surprisingly exciting game. Just as an aside, like NFL talk, Jimmy Garoppolo, it's 2.8 million dead cap if they release him, and it's about 25 million. I think maybe even a little more than 25 million if they keep him next year. Scott, if they called you up and they said, "You're a smart guy, Scott, what direction should the 49ers go at quarterback?"
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about, trade deadline speculation, but we talk about the fantasy gods who are just so cruel to us, but it really looks like they're being smited by the NFL gods. It's just not their year. Jimmy Garoppolo, Raheem Mostert, and 2 other running backs, Deebo Samuel, Jalen Hurd, Kittle Reed, Weston Richburg, Nick Bosa, Dee Ford, Ziggy Ansah, Solomon Thomas, Richard Sherman, Quan Williams, Jaquiski Tartt. They're 4-4 in the toughest division in the NFL. I think they're just saying, hey, not your year. And maybe you should just commit to that. And I think why not? The one bright spot on Jimmy going down, Nick Mullins coming in, was that George Kittle's actually more productive when Nick Mullins is starting, because Mullins doesn't pretend like he's a real NFL quarterback like Jimmy Garoppolo does. He just gets the ball to his best player over and over again. And yeah, I mean, I don't think this is your guy. Could we see, Kyle Shanahan trade for Matt Ryan maybe at MVP season? Yeah. That would be very exciting for me. I mean, Falcons are going to be well positioned for a quarterback in an absolutely stacked quarterback class this year. A lot of guys to like, and yeah, and if you look at the stats on Nick Mullins versus Jimmy Garoppolo by basically every stat, PFF grade, adjusted yards per attempt, they're basically the same player. And last year during the draft, it was reported that the 49ers received multiple trade offers for Nick Mullins, and they were adamant that they were not trading him. But we also saw him get benched for CJ Beathard. Beathard come in against prevent defense in the Eagles and looked great. But yeah, I mean, this might be the last we see of Jimmy Garoppolo in a 49ers uniform starting games.
Yes. And it's been interesting to watch. And again, I try not to do this really, like bring up things that I said before. But I bring it up because I didn't really hear anyone else talking about this, that even though Garoppolo had this kind of breakthrough year in the playoffs, they didn't really trust him. And then when he had to make a throw in the Super Bowl, he didn't. Oof. And that stuff stays with you. And that stays with you as the quarterback and as the team. And I just wondered how he would respond, how the team would respond, whether the team would have that true confidence in him. Because I think that's something you can pick up on, Scott. It used to be you listen to the din of the crowd. Like there's a certain disgust that comes out of the crowd that usually precedes a quarterback getting benched. The din has this sense of like, we're not even lustily booing you anymore. Like we're just tired of this. And I think you can tell when a team starts to lose confidence in their quarterback. And I'm not sure that the team had confidence in Jimmy Garoppolo or Jimmy Garoppolo had confidence in Jimmy Garoppolo. So you're right to bring up Matt Ryan. Kirk Cousins, another name. And it's just fascinating how quickly things change in the NFL. You just have to close out a fourth quarter, your Super Bowl champ. Garoppolo probably is the quarterback of the 49ers to eternity. Mm-hmm. And instead, now we have questions, lots of questions. And, injury luck plays into this stuff. But at the same time, I thought it was fascinating last weekend, Scott, that, we saw Robert Spillane making one of the key plays in a big game, or Justin Zimmer. Sometimes it is those guys. It's just like fantasy football. The way you pick the last guy on your bench can be the difference between winning and losing in a very important time of the year. Speaking of that Baltimore-Pittsburgh game, how much do we trust John Harbaugh to see what we all saw and say, Mark Ingram, even when you're healthy, you're a backup. J.K. Dobbins is better. Gus Edwards is better. And then we'll, in turn, be able to count on these guys in our lineup, because if they can run on Pittsburgh, they can run on anybody.
So I just wanted one more point on Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't think they ever really had much confidence in him. And you saw that in the Super Bowl when they were playing so conservative, just relying on their defense against the number one offense in like maybe a decade. And so I don't know that level of confidence in Jimmy was there. And then they went out, they drafted Brandon Ayuk and just basically gave him, hey, you could average, you could have an ADOT of like 2.4. These guys are going to lift up your yard per attempt to 9.7 because they're all freaks. But this is one of the greatest offensive minds in football, Kyle Shanahan. So whoever lands there, even if it is another year of Jimmy G, should at least turn out high-end QB2 production. But yeah, J.K. Dobbins. So like one of my quote-unquote bold calls was J.K. Dobbins would lead all running backs in yards per carry this year. And right now he leads all running backs in yards per carry. But that was like a fake. That wasn't like a real bold call because it's not factoring in rushing attempts. Yards per carry is a bad stat. And like he wasn't someone I targeted because Mark Ingram, all they ever said was they're going to give him veteran deference. Gus Edwards, like he's good. Like that's a dynasty owners need to just take that into account. He's actually pretty good. But yeah, so I would love to see him get a bell cow workload. I don't think that's going to happen this year. I think next year he's, a dynasty superstar, maybe high-end RB2, hyper efficient in this Lamar Jackson offense. But yeah, I wouldn't be too optimistic. They seem very comfortable in this RBBC approach. And we know Lamar Jackson's not going to target running backs heavily at all. And, this isn't the same offense. Regression, has hit Lamar Jackson like a sack of hammers, and it's had a fallout throughout all the position pieces in this NFL. But I mean, what was it? 250 yards against the Steelers?
Right. With 4 turnovers. He was still a viable fantasy play last week with 4 turnovers against a tough defense. And I think actually it's funny because that kind of we can file under similar to Garoppolo, like scars from the playoffs. Even though Lamar Jackson had a tremendous fantasy day against Tennessee, he was gripping, he was pressing. It was very disappointing. And he hasn't looked comfortable, except for maybe against the Browns to open the season. He hasn't really looked comfortable this year or dialed in. And really quick to go back to something you mentioned about Nick Mullins. It makes sense to me that everyone would be interested in Mullins because he runs those Kyle Shanahan concepts. And that I think that's infecting all the Freudian stuff, all the other offenses, and he's going to be competent doing that. I think Cecil's brought up that Denver, when Rich Scangarello went over there to become the offensive coordinator after being the quarterback coach in San Francisco, they were inquiring about Nick Mullins. So something else to keep in mind in your 2 quarterback super flex leagues with Mullins, and we'll see. Also, he's not going to have Deebo Samuel. He's not going to have George Kittle, at least no Samuel for this Thursday night game. And you're probably right to say, John Harbaugh won't turn the page to Dobbins and Edwards until next year. It was still awesome to see. I mean, as awesome as it could be as a Steelers fan.
He looks amazing. He should do it.
With Dobbins, a guy that comes to mind when I watch him, Scott, is like Arian Foster. I mean, it's the closest one I can come up with because he's obviously so juiced, like physically strong, sudden, and he's got some burst and some speed, but he's so flexible. His body almost looks like fluid when they're trying to bring him down, and he can rub off of contact in a way that Foster could, and just extend runs and get 3 or 4 or 5 extra yards whenever your brain says, okay, that run's over. And that, in addition to the home run quality that he adds, absolutely, Dobbins is really exciting. I would still take my chances if I could pry him away from someone in a redraft league. You're not going to get to do that in a dynasty league. How much are you looking at? I brought up the schedule for Indianapolis, for instance, and their running game as part of that picture. How much are you looking at schedule now that we're at a point where we really have triangulated the good defenses, the bad defenses, run, pass, etc.? Are you looking at schedule as an important piece of valuing players at this point?
Yeah, I do. I have this spreadsheet that I update typically Wednesdays. I try to get it done for today, but couldn't do it in time. But I look at strength of schedule from up until now, from the start of the season until now, and then I look at it from this point on to the rest of the season, try and project things out. So like one thing looking at that, so last week, the 2 quarterbacks who had the toughest strength of schedules to start the season were 1, Derek Carr, 2, Justin Herbert. And so if you add back their strength of schedule to their fantasy production, Justin Herbert becomes, the number 3 fantasy QB by fantasy points per game. If you add that back to Derek Carr, he becomes 4 or 5. And both of those guys have much softer schedules for the remainder of the season. So that's something to really look at and think about. Like I said, though, I'm a little behind on that spreadsheet right now.
Yeah, well, since you brought up those two, with Vegas, what we have is, and I brought up in the weekly thing I do with Joe Holka, trade targets, both Carr and Henry Ruggs, because you got the Chargers old school AFL shootout coming this weekend, Denver, Kansas City, Atlanta, and the Jets. Whew. Yeah, you would like that for the next 5 weeks for sure. And Herbert, that's just one of the stories. That's one of the stories of any year. Vegas, Miami, whose defense is changing into a elite defense right before our eyes. Then Jets, Buffalo, New England. Not really quite sure what to do with them. Atlanta, Vegas, and Denver. I'm curious what you would say about Chicago, because Chicago. Do you see that? I want to bring this up because I like it. Do you see the T-shirts that they wear in Chicago, Scott? It says "Mitch, please." So, you watch the Bears, and at least once each time during the game, at least once you think, are they going to put Trubisky in? I mean, that's how Foles is playing.
Yeah.
Sometimes you will have almost no confidence in him, and then he'll scratch and scrape, and maybe they'll be in a game or win a game like they did over the Bucks. How do they beat the Bucks? But at the same time, you have this Chicago schedule. Listen to this, Scott. This is the remaining Chicago schedule. Tennessee, Minnesota, a bye, Green Bay, Detroit, Houston, Minnesota again, and Jacksonville. I mean, that's a runway. So are you trusting the schedule and Matt Nagy, who's quickly becoming like Adam Gase II? There's friction there, by the way, between Foles and Gase. See, there's my brain already doing it. Foles and Nagy. Do we trust? I mean, because we're talking about Allen Robinson. We're talking about Darnell Mooney, who might even be on your waiver wire. We're talking about even Anthony Miller, who I'm sure is on your waiver wire, who did some things, 11 targets last week. We're talking about even Jimmy Graham for your Kittle, someone to pick up and see. This is a schedule. And David Montgomery, who still looks like he doesn't have an overwhelming burst, but his tackle breaking ability is coming into play more often. He's getting more consistent targets with Tariq Cohen out. Do we trust the Bears schedule? Do we make a move to get a piece of the offense? Or is it one of these moments where we come to our senses and say, why are you investing in the Bears?
Yeah, I think I'm just viewing it as a fantasy wasteland, which is basically all we have ever seen from, a Nagy run Bears offense.
5 weeks in Trubisky's first full year.
Right.
As that game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when everything worked, and that was about it.
Mm-hmm. I think defense has just quickly figured out whatever Nagy's offense is, and it's just like not good. It's not creative.
Right.
Heading into the season, I pulled up like all quarterbacks by depth adjusted completion percentage, which is a good measurement of target accuracy. And the two worst quarterbacks on the list were Trubisky and Foles. Like, just imagine that quarterback competition. Oh my God. Yeah. And that hurts everyone. I like Darnell Mooney a lot. On tape, he is getting open and wide open consistently. But guess what? He ranks third worst in catchable target percentage. David Montgomery is on paper a guy I should be drooling over. He's a full-on bell cow, which is what I target at the running back position. Even if you want to count Cordarrelle Patterson as like a running back, or at least his backfield snaps that he's getting, it's still like fantastic volume, fantastically high percentage of the team's carry, snaps, targets, and he's still not doing anything. He's not producing. We saw him flop against Carolina, so that makes me nervous. Even though, yes, he's going to have. I pulled it up actually. I think like 6 of their next 8-10 games are against defenses ranking bottom 10 in fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. But I mean, like, you flop against Carolina. It's just not good. And we haven't seen much from him. And you could sell out to stop the run because none of the quarterbacks are really imposing in the slightest. And it's just all around. It's not fun. It's not good.
Probably correct. All right. And one more. And I'll tell you, since you only watched half the game, the trend of Danny Dimes missing Darius Slayton continued. And it's funny because Mooney and Slayton, like Mooney's reminding me, he's giving me Slayton vibes, including the quarterback for that matter. But, speed guys who actually show right away they're a lot more than speed guys. let's look at the Giants schedule and a similar question. Because, Sterling Shepard, nobody cares about him, really. Evan Engram, nobody cares about him. Should we care about the Giants? And I know that, speaking of schedule strength, Daniel Jones has faced a pretty rough schedule in terms of opposing defenses. Going forward, he faces Washington, which can be rough, Philadelphia, which can be rough. And then after the bye, Cincinnati, Seattle, and Arizona, Cleveland week 15. He does finish up with Baltimore. You think there could be any kind of offensive revival, or is Jason Garrett just going to smother the baby in the crib?
Yeah, that's a good one. I might just be a negatively biased Giants homer, but I just have no optimism for this offense as a whole. Darius Slayton, like you said, he ranks 4th in air yardage market share. Like the volume's there, but it's not accurate volume. We should discount it because of who these targets are coming from. Same with, Darnell Mooney, where it's like, okay, one Russell Wilson throw is worth like 3.
It's why we should have been all over DK Metcalf in rookie draft 2 years ago, right? Like as soon as a year and a half, it's Russell Wilson. And this is something, and you should work on this, Scott, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you get me excited because I know you come up with, I just talk and have ideas like diarrhea of the brain, but you can pin these things down to metrics, and there's got to be a way that we can really triangulate exactly how much difference there is in value between a 50-yard target from Foles versus a 50-yard target. And it's something that we should always be thinking about in drafts and lineup setting. The value of these players aren't independent. But what about those Giants as a homer who I'm sure is not feeling great?
Yeah, so thanks for that idea. I like that idea a lot. I'll probably work on something in the offseason and pick your brain over it. But I want to steer this back to you. What do you think? Because I'm a negatively biased Giants homer. But I mean, Daniel Jones, his biggest problem is the fumbles, but that's something that almost always regresses to the mean. It's something that's very easily fixable, coachable. We've seen that time and time again. But it's also a function of he just doesn't see the pass rush at times and just gets completely blindsided by a defender. But he also does, Danny Dimes is a great nickname because he does throw some amazing dimes at times. And he has a bottom 5 offensive line. He has a bottom 5 running back room. He has a bottom 5 receiving core. Evan Engram looks, just dust this year. A lot of drop passes. And so the Giants are going to be staring at, let's say, a Zach Wilson in a few months. What do? Do you just wash your hands of Daniel Jones? Or is it no. We've seen the bright spots, and we've just given him the worst supporting cast in football. And it's, how often does a rookie or a sophomore, really young quarterback, is he able to uplift such a bad coaching, bad offensive line, bad receiving core? I mean, Joe Burrow is kind of doing it. Andrew Luck did it. But what are your thoughts on Daniel Jones?
Yeah, this is interesting, right? Because I think you've got a lot of the pieces of the Daniel Jones scouting report to this point nailed. Pocket awareness is a big blind spot for him. And in some ways it helps him. It helps him because the dude will hang in under pressure, even sometimes staring down the barrel when he knows he's going to get hit, and he will deliver. So you like that. But I don't know how you iron out this idea that he doesn't really have a clock and he doesn't really have that sense of when it's time to get scared in the pocket. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that there's a massive piece that's being left on the table because this is not an intuitive or innovative offensive staff, which is Daniel Jones' running ability. I mean, he's a big guy. So like a Cam Newton, like a Josh Allen, you're not afraid of him getting hurt as a runner. And we've seen him bust off 2 long runs already this year. So you can use the threat of him as a runner to slow down the pass rush, because and also I would almost coach up Daniel Jones to go first read, second read, and run like Colin Kaepernick, like late career Colin Kaepernick, because then you mitigate his pocket awareness problems, because when you face a quarterback like that, you have to mush rush them. You want to keep them contained in the pocket, because if you pin your ears back and come at them and you're playing man to man and everyone's running downfield routes, you're in trouble. They're going to, he's going to feast. For fantasy, this is something relevant too. Did Jason Garrett and company have it in them to craft an offense to his particular strengths and weaknesses at this point? I don't think so. Because the problem is when he gets past read 2, read 3, and he's still fighting, he'll try to make these throws either that he can't make or he'll get hit as he's throwing, and that's when you get interceptions and you get these bad fumbles and things like that. But his deep accuracy last night was just distressing for old Darius Slayton. I will tell you, by the way, Evan Ingram on the last drive came down to a 2-point conversion that could have tied the game, but a ref, they called it and then they didn't call it. Ingram had one of those catch the back half of the ball, like 25 yards downfield to set up the game tying score, which is an excellent play by Golden Tate. So Ingram, hopefully, they used him downfield and he caught it this time. So maybe there's something there. We'll watch the trade deadline here with 10 minutes left. It's still quiet, by the way. Just waiting for the.
I'll just say on Evan Ingram, our injury expert, I think, called it. He went back through the medical literature and it said a player coming off of, what was it, a patellar injury with Evan Ingram. Their first year back, they're at 80% effectiveness, typically by like any stat you want to look at. And then the year after, they're very close back to 100%. So it could just be this is a tough injury to come back from and one that lingers and saps you of your overall effectiveness. You also talked about Daniel Jones running more. I was trying to find it. I couldn't find it, but I did a big Twitter thread on this in the offseason where like that's actually the most efficient play in football is QBs running the ball. They're more like the running backs don't matter, zealots, like the rushing doesn't matter. So if you look at that, that's true. Like passing per play is so much more efficient than running, but QB running is way more efficient than even QB passing. And it's like, even like a guy like Phillip Rivers will be ridiculously efficient. Of course, that's because they're not running a lot. They're waiting for a massive hole and to pick up the first down. And then guys like Lamar Jackson, like obviously like Kyler Murray this year, it's such a cheat code. But yeah, all the data suggests QBs, especially one like Daniel Jones, that run was clocked at like a Tyreek Hill level of speed. The way, I mean, of course he fell down, but should be doing that more. It is one of the most efficient. We're always trying to look up the next thing, analytics, and like typically Bill Belichick's already on it, like play action. But this is one of those. So I'm in full agreement with you. He should look to rush more often than he is.
Yeah, by design, like make it something that the defense has to prepare for every single week. Mark Williams in the chat room had a question that transitioned into the next topic perfectly. He said, it sounds like a dumb question. Give Zeke, get Sanders being Miles Sanders, and this is an entree into the Philadelphia offense. But I didn't have to think long about that. Who would you rather have from this moment forward in your redraft league or in your dynasty league? Zeke or Sanders?
In your dynasty league?
Well, let's just say redraft. Let's just cap it at this year for now.
Yeah. That's tough. I think the lean is Sanders. It's just it should be a more efficient offense when Andy Dalton comes back, but that's another week away. The volume is certainly there, but it's been dwindling as the entire offensive line concerns as well, whereas Miles Sanders has only ever looked awesome in every game so far. While, of course, Eagles offense has similar problems for sure, but yeah, it also doesn't look like that's the thing with Zeke is like, so he's popping in my numbers. He's the number one guy by XFP, expected fantasy points. So he has seen amazing volume this year, but he has like one run over 14 yards or something. Right. And it's just like not forcing missed tackles. I don't know what's going on there, but yeah, I think this year you got to lean Miles Sanders.
Yeah, and this is a good year, like Matt Waldman RSP style, like with expected fantasy points. You could always go back under the hood. You always look at like where it was really predictive and telling and where it wasn't. And there's that efficiency element where David Montgomery you brought up already that I'm sure expected fantasy points loves him. But there are offenses that just aren't efficient enough even to make that kind of like Le'Veon Bell last year, even that kind of volume. Leonard Fournette to a lesser extent. Not all targets are created equal. Not all carries, not all running back. I just think with Zeke, like you said, Andy Dalton's going to come back and make the offense better. That's like saying, well, maybe the ship won't sink, but it's certainly not getting to port. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's just going to float in the ocean instead of sinking now. It looks like Cooper Rush is going to start this week, by the way, against Pittsburgh. But what about the Philly offense in general? Because there's still buy low opportunities. Rager, Goddard. The last time we saw Carson Wentz, he was awful, just awful. There's opportunities here, though. Travis Fulgham, I think, is one that there's not a buy low opportunity. People will be happy there. And I got to say, by the way, Mike Kay, one of my favorite beat writers, told me and wrote the definitive article about Fulgham's background after the San Francisco game. So this is just when he caught 2 passes, including that long touchdown. And he said he's a keeper. So Mike Kay, he's looking at you, man, being way ahead of the curve. Are you ahead of the curve if you start investing in the Philly offense right now during their bye?
I think it depends on the pieces you're going after. I think Miles Sanders for sure buy. I just pulled it back up his numbers. I think he's hit 100-yard scrimmage in every game this year, but one.
Right.
He, 7.3 yards per carry against Pittsburgh, 13.1 against Baltimore. So smashing against tough defenses. You like to see it. Boston Scott had some productivity and efficiency last week as well. Dallas Goedert, I think, is a buy. Zach Ertz, I have no answers there.
Right.
But it might be over the edge of the age cliff. But Dallas Goedert, that you love him. He wasn't close to 100%, but he played last week. Jalen Reagor, one of my guys in the offseason, no Deshaun Jackson, so he should slide into that role, and that's a role that's been productive for Carson Wentz when it's been there. He has a big arm. But yeah, I think the answer might be buy high on Travis Fulgham. Your beat writer was on him early. Our guy, Adam Kaplan, NFL Insider, same exact thing, has been on him for quite some time, maybe even before his first game played. And he just looks like the X, and Kaplan saying the X of the future. So your ears should perk up for Dynasty. And he's productive. He's efficient. He looks awesome. Shades of Kenny Galladay in his last few games. So, and we know Carson Wentz has a tendency to just lock on to some guys when that's there.
And by the way, Philly's schedule after the bye: Giants, Cleveland, Seattle, Green Bay, New Orleans, Arizona, and Dallas in Week 16. Dallas in Week 16. So yeah, Fulgham. It's a great story, folks. If you haven't read Mike Kay's story, Fulgham was I think a basketball player, and the SAT prep teacher was also the football coach, and said, "Hey, have you thought about playing football? Keep you in shape when you're not during basketball season." It's like 11th grade, when he started playing football. So the universe wanted him to be a football player, and the universe wanted the Eagles to get bailed out for missing on J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. So that's the way it works out, right? Like you totally shank a pick on a second-round wide receiver, and you get one for free because of Detroit, and just for a second there, Green Bay letting Fulgham get through their grasp. We're coming up on the trade deadline. This is Al Capone's vault this year. I don't know if that reference is too old for the younger people out there. Not seeing anything yet, so I think
DeAndre Washington to Miami.
Boring. I was wondering, someone threw out there, I think it was Chris Kaufman, who I love, said, no specific intel, but Todd Gurley to Miami would have been interesting. But that's, the DeAndre Washington one's interesting just because with Miami's defense looking so good, some of that is giving the rest of the league a blueprint for making Jared Goff look bad. That this is maybe a more balanced offense, even if they're only running for 3 yards a carry, and asking Tua to just convert 3rd and 4s and things like that. DeAndre Washington might be better than Myles Gaskin. That's no slight on Myles Gaskin. That's interesting. I'll file that one away. Let's see. Speaking of trade deadline, trade action, and again, I want to say that if you play fantasy football, get into trades, especially if you play dynasty leagues and keeper leagues. This is the time to look at your roster, look at other rosters, look at records, put yourself in the place of other teams, try to find win-win trades. It's fun. We all need some endorphins now. Would you be experiencing more endorphins, Scott, if you could trade away Michael Thomas or trade for Michael Thomas right now? Because I think there's still enough skepticism that the trade window's open.
I feel like I'd trade for him. I don't see why he wouldn't be a top 5 wide receiver.
Would you give a Fulgham for him in a redraft league? Would you give Fulgham for Thomas?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I mean, like, what is your reasoning behind why we've seen so little Michael Thomas? Is it just a bad injury that's lingered, or is there something more going on behind the scenes?
Well, we've talked about this a few times on the show. Jeff Duncan, who's covered the Saints forever, wrote a piece on it in the Athletic, like around week 5, that said Michael Thomas is wearing everyone out. Like everyone's getting tired of his act, and he needs to start mending relationships. So there's something there. Like it's one of those things, Scott. If we hear that Thomas is traded like in February after the combine, we should be like, oh, who could have ever seen this coming? You know.
Right.
But I think some of it is injuries, and I think some of it is just, maybe you noticed that he hasn't been out there. Has it been hampering New Orleans? You know, I mean,
right.
Well, so I do think that we're not going to see a return to 2019 Michael Thomas numbers. The question is, does he find the equilibrium at a place where he's more like a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, or is it still strong but just not record-breaking strong? And whatever his value is now, it will change after next week.
I don't see why he can't. I mean, he's been close to playing, at least allegedly.
Right.
And then, so I don't know why, if he's on the field, he can't return to being an easy top 5 fantasy wide receiver. And if that's the case, maybe the way to play that is you have Alvin Kamara, you trade him for Miles Sanders plus, because it's just Alvin Kamara with Michael Thomas off the field is Christian McCaffrey.
Right.
And then when Michael Thomas is on the field, he's, I mean, a top 5 running back still for sure, but it is going to be a loss of about maybe 6 consistent targets per game.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought too. I mean, Kamara is absolutely one of those players that his perceived value can't be higher. Like it's not like he could go out and have another Dalvin Cook week, and it's still like that's the value where he's at, and it's not going to change. And that's just potentially some of the best sell high trades. It's difficult. Some of the best sell high trades are the ones that even as you're accepting it, you're thinking, oh, is this the right move? Am I going to regret this? This feels too risky. I'm giving up something. And then those are the ones that end up really working out.
Speaking of injuries,
yeah.
that might not be real injuries, I would love to see New England trade Stephon Gilmore within the next few minutes.
Ooh, yes. Yeah. And by the way, and I'm looking here.
Just go full tank.
Yeah. Well, and certainly I wouldn't put it past Bill Belichick, because I think the deal is that he's going to want a new contract next year, and I don't think he's going to get it. Will Fuller will not be traded.
Okay.
Texans and Packers could not agree on value.
That means the Packers were being donkeys.
Yeah, and it's also that thing that we heard, and it's interesting whenever this stuff comes to the surface, that basically Rob Demovsky, who's covered the Packers for a long time, said basically, LaFleur wanted Fuller, and Gutekunst is like, meh. What's really interesting is that Dr. Gene Bramall, who's been studying injury stuff forever, I asked him, because I sometimes have fun and just throw him a question out of left field. I said, if the Packers called you and said, should we trade for Will Fuller because of the injury history? He said, what can Will Fuller add to the offense that Alan Lazard wasn't adding before he got hurt? So maybe Alan Lazard is a name to remember there. But looking at the Schefter and rap sheet, I mean, we may get something. I haven't heard official all clear, but kind of a big, nothing here at the trade deadline. So I'm sorry, Scott. I'm sorry that I occupied you at the trade deadline. I thought we were going to have some fun with this, but we weren't. We will have fun with the last 10 minutes here. Coming a little short, a little under an hour here, as it is a big day. But we just had a big day pass, and I know that you like to see like the eternal stories, not just the instance or iteration that we're on. How was your Halloween, Scott?
Oh man, yeah. For whatever reason, you always have me on around the holidays, and
yeah, I know.
I just I never celebrate holidays during football season. I
understand. Well, tell us about what are your memories of Halloween as a kid?
Oh man, that was my favorite. I was just an absolute savage, where I'd have like a giant pillowcase, and there would be the bowls that would only take one, and I would just every single time just dump the whole thing. I was one of those. I know, but I had a great costume every year, and took it seriously and loved it.
Do you remember any of your childhood Halloween costumes?
Yeah, I was early on a Power Ranger, a ninja, vampire, a ninja vampire. That one was easy. Just meld the two together. Yeah, and then just in like from college on, I would just do the same costume, which was just me in like a $20 awesome fur coat I picked up at Goodwill, and people were like, "What are you?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I just look awesome. I just look like a total badass."
Yeah, that's all you need. I mean, and for me, because I don't think of myself as a total badass in any way, that would definitely be a costume. I'm pretending I'm a badass. I did, by the way, on Thursday, Zach Herbert's asking about in the chat room. I did Running with the Devil. I was like a, runner, but I had my devil horns.
Okay,
nice. Devilish makeup. A little Eddie Van Halen tribute there too. But Ninja's awesome, right? I mean, I'm happy to see that even among kids now, like ninjas have this incredible draw, because when I was a kid, I was a kid a little bit before you were, but ninja was a big deal. I think there was this rash of ninja movies in the 80s, and I had no supervision growing up. Can you tell? So I watched a lot of R-rated movies, and I remember one of them was Revenge of the Ninja, and I was probably 7 or 8, maybe 6 when I saw it, and it introduced me to the whole aesthetic and vibe of ninjas, throwing stars and the two-toe boots and silent assassins, and ninja's awesome. Vampire ninja's even better when you get into the mashup costumes, and it's fun because in Halloween you're playing with forms, you're playing with almost like alternate versions of yourself, or something that goes against your inner nature, or at least your perception of your own inner nature. It's a chance to be somebody different, so we could do that all year. In New Orleans, we certainly do that all year. In New Orleans, there's a sense of like, we're always wearing a mask. We're always wearing a costume. Like, this is a costume, right? Like, whatever you are, Scott Barrett, or whatever I am, Sigmund Bloom, our bodies or our forms are kind of a costume. And I'm just glad. I'll say this about Halloween. Whenever it was Noah, my stepson, my wife's son, 7, and he, Halloween was not typical Halloween. But to be honest, it was sad. I did the candy shoot at our place, and they went trick-or-treating around Mid-City, and my wife told me, like, well, like on some blocks there weren't any houses giving out candy. But sometimes you turn the corner and there'd be like 4 or 5 houses giving out candy. And the people that were giving out candy were so excited, and beers, by the way, New Orleans, beer for the parents, or Jell-O shots. They were so excited to see people that the spirit really came out, and he even was like, "Happy Halloween, like, thanks, I'm having a great Halloween." So less of it did not decrease the appreciation, it actually increased the appreciation, right? So like in our own lives, the amount of appreciation or enjoyment is not directly proportional to the amount of the thing, right? Is there anything that's been like that for you during the pandemic, where even though it's not as strong of a presence in your life, or as much of a presence in your life, you're finding that you appreciate it even more, or maybe even you just look forward to the time, hopefully, when we can have more public life again, and that part of public life, something that you miss?
Yeah, so I'm just I live in Texas, so it's not too bad. I know friends in New Jersey and California, it's a lot different. But I'm someone who can just, insane workaholic who lives chained to his desk for the entire of the football season. But I love what I do, so it's not as depressing as it might sound. So I could just do this all day. It's quarantine. I barely notice any difference. I'm like, all right, well, I eat Taco Bell for lunch, and I eat Chick-fil-A for dinner every day. I don't need to do any of that. But no, I'm so excited. I also just, started up my own company. So this was a really high stress, a lot of work, a lot of dedication. But I'm really excited for, once the season ends, to be able to go out, visit my friends and family in New Jersey, New York City, go visit, other friends out in California, and just really have some. I never take it. I'm like such a workaholic. So, I'm going to take a month off. But this time I'm like actually going to take a month off, see some people, maybe go to, are there lockdowns in the Bahamas? Like hopefully not, maybe go on an extravagant vacation, maybe visit you, Sig.
Yeah. So, I don't know if we'll have Mardi Gras this year, but I mean, like true Mardi Gras. It's going to be interesting because there's a very delicate balance between like you can say there are things that you aren't allowed to do, but will city governments actually enforce that? Will people just go forward? It's going to be uncharted territory. I mean, almost all 2020 we've been in uncharted territory, and 2021 is going to be uncharted territory. But that's beautiful. I mean, the idea, stop and smell the roses, and football will be there waiting for us. Football's not going anywhere, at least not for now. It sounds like, getting these COVID things under control. And absolutely. I like the idea of counting your blessings, basically, going around. And go to the Bahamas, get out and enjoy something else, And I'll remind you too about, I think the place is called Crawfish and Noodles in Houston.
I've been there. It was awesome. It was fantastic.
Good. And they have a shirt here or a bumper sticker in New Orleans, Scott. It says, "Let's have lunch and talk about dinner." Like eating is, it's just so, it's one of the joys of being alive, and it still continues to be, at least when you live someplace by New Orleans. Also, we got hit by a hurricane last week. I got to experience the eye of the storm. Have now you're from New Jersey, but has Houston taken a hit from a hurricane since you moved down there?
Yeah, we've had a few, and then when I was in New Jersey, we had Hurricane Sandy, which was
super
catastrophic. It I had the best experience with it because I was just like a shitty 22-year-old kid, and so work got canceled all week, and we went to a local bar for this, and like they had cots out for all, like my best friend worked there, her dad worked there, so they had cots in case it came to that. We just got absolutely hammered, and then the storm hit, and we see all these transformers falling down and exploding. It was just so ridiculous. But then it was an entire week of nothing but me and my aimless friends just walking to this one bar that was the only place with electricity, so we'd charge our phones and we would just get hammered. And then a week later, work opened back up, and but for a week, people were going crazy, and like I get it, and it was catastrophic, but it was just like a shitty 22-year-old thing to do, where it's just like, well, I'm going to get drunk and have fun.
It's very valid. That's how they handle hurricanes down here in New Orleans. Basically, just make sure that your liquor stock is full, and then you ride it out. And I think that's a very valid reaction to that. Why not go on a multi-day drunk? And of course, this isn't just the trade deadline; it's election day, and maybe that's a way to solve. Maybe that's a way to solve America's problems. Is let's all go on like a week-long drunk together, regardless of who you were aligned with, who you voted for, whether you voted or not. Let's just take a week off, no work, no school, maybe babysitters or something, and let's all get drunk together. Or did you see what's on the ballot in New Jersey this year?
Ooh, what's that?
Recreational marijuana.
Hey.
Next time you go back to Jersey and visit everybody, another thing maybe that could help us all get along.
Everyone seems so mellow and chilled out. What happened?
Yeah, right. Jersey. All of a sudden, people don't want to get in fights anymore. What happened? So it's great. And the last question is on Jersey, and then we'll go off to our grind, which we love, as you put so well. And I don't know if we've talked about this before. Maybe we did. Maybe we didn't. Did you ever go to Action Park?
What's Action Park?
So maybe it was a little bit after you were a kid there. It's the park that basically didn't have rules and was the amusement park that was Class Action Park, I think, is the name of the documentary about it.
I've heard of it. I never went.
It's one of those Jersey legends,
Oh my God! Actually, I did go. I think is it formerly Mountain Creek?
Yes.
Then absolutely I did, and I rode the scooter thing that got
down the hill, the one that tears up.
It was awesome. I loved it. I was so disappointed they got rid of that. Yeah,
and it's I think that it was based on like it was a park where you make the action, a little bit of fear of death, a little bit of fear of injury, make things more fun.
Raising the stakes. Come on.
Yeah, keeping it real. Well, folks, Scott Barrett Barrett, 2 R's, 2 T's, DFB for good old dude Fantasy Bro. Fantasy Points, as you mentioned, Adam Kaplan, Greg Cosell, who I was referring to his Drake Luton scouting reports, and lots of other great minds of fantasy out there at Fantasy Points. And, we're still here for you. I think now on a day like today, especially, people are really enjoying just take your mind off something else, change the channel for a little bit. That's what we're always here for you folks. We're privileged and pleased to play that role for you always, because you're so very